Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and it's a brand new month, which means it's time for the next installment of Spawn. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First printed in March of 1993, we see once again a very iconic Spawn cover featuring the first appearance of Angela and the remnants of the first appearance of the medieval Spawn. This book also contains the first appearance of one Nicholas Cagliostro, three characters who would have varying degrees of importance to the Spawn story going forward. Story, Neil Gaiman. Art, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ollie Optics. We can see here on the first page that this is the first issue of Spawn that is ever printed on gloss pages. Classing it up, that's nice to see. And before we go any further, we're going to have to get into the history lesson that comes along with this book, as Spawn number 9 would go on to become the book that cost Todd McFarlane millions and millions of dollars. And this comes down to the fact that while Neil Gaiman wrote the story, he also, and more importantly, co-created the characters of Cagliostro, Medieval Spawn, and the one that's going to be most relevant to today's history lesson, Angela. Now, had Todd McFarlane contracted Neil Gaiman to do this, everything would have been fine. Unfortunately, that's not what Todd did. Todd instead gave a verbal agreement to Neil Gaiman that he was the co-creator and co-owner of these three characters, which entitled Gaiman to not only have some say in how the characters were used, but also entitled him to royalties to said characters going forward. Todd, however, tried to pull a fast one and claimed that all three of these characters were his because Gaiman was contracted as an independent contractor, meaning that he wouldn't retain any rights. He was just paid for services rendered. This became a whole problem. The two of them went into a lengthy court battle that started in 2002. Gaiman ended up winning that court battle, so he then had legal co-ownership of the three characters, and he was also entitled to royalties that Todd had not been paying him for use of these characters and reprints of these characters in trade paperback form or reissued hardback form. So between whatever amount of money Todd was spending on legal fees, which had to be a lot, and the money he then had to pay to Gaiman, which he owed him, he was out a big chunk of change, and this was a very costly mistake on his part. And I say that it was a mistake because I do believe that Todd was in the wrong here. He kind of tried to get away with something that he knew he couldn't, and he knew that he shouldn't have been trying to do in the interest of profits. And, don't put money before people that you consider to be your friends is the best advice I can give to anyone watching this. But, it didn't end there. Gaiman and McFarlane did work out another deal in 2012, which gave Gaiman sole ownership of the Angela character, which is why she is now a Marvel character, as he promptly sold her to Marvel. And she is now Thor's long-lost sister, I believe, is the story they came up with. It doesn't matter because I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, Angela's entire story and history starts and ends in Image Comics, and whatever Disney does with her is none of my concern. Not my Angela. We see here on the first page a woman crying in the forest, distraught, as we also see a parchment that is explaining the rules of hunting a hellspawn. We then see Angela approached by Spawn in this cape as she asks for help and, wants this person to come to her aid, or this Spawn that we believe might be Al Simmons, but it's not. It is instead the medieval Spawn making his very first appearance, looking pretty cool, all armored up with the shield, the faceplate, riding a horse. He asks if the maiden needs help. She exclaims that she does need help. She is hurt, but she is no longer a maiden as she has been defiled by an ogre. And then begs the medieval Spawn to help her save her sister, who is still in the clutches of said ogre and is back at his lair in a cave. He obliges to help, taking a lot of concern for the well-being of this stranger to him. As he puts her up on his horse, they are riding. She continues to play innocent as she asks about why he covers his face, and he says it's because she would never want to see the face underneath his mask. And then talks to her about her sister, saying that he had a sister that he wanted to see married before he died. She asked if this happened. He said that he had to go away for a while, referencing that he did die, but not really going into the details that he's resurrected from hell. And that she was married when he came back, but to someone that he would have never chosen for her. We also get a cool rundown here of explaining how the young Hellspawn are not motivated by evil, as they haven't been on Earth for very long. We don't know exactly how long Medieval Spawn has been back on Earth at this point, but he is still not a being of pure evil yet. He still holds a level of nobility and chivalry, I guess, to his personality. We also find out that in the parchment readings, the younger spawn that are sent to Earth, not every Hellspawn is sent to Earth. That's a big thing. This had to be explained after issue number 8. If you'd like to know more about issue number 8 of Spawn, please feel free to check out my video on issue number 8 or my entire Spawn playlist if you feel so inclined. The ones that are sent back to Earth are only the ones that Mabalja is considering as officers for his army to fight the war against heaven. So they are of particular interest to the Mabalja, which is why they can be hunted by the angels, because the ones that are not sent back and are in the non-earthly realm are off limits until the war between heaven and hell has been formally declared. This explains why Billy Kincaid was given the K3 Mirlu suit to become a Hellspawn, but was not sent back to Earth, and it's because he was not under consideration for becoming an officer in the army of hell. I'd also like to point out, this is kind of the first instance that we're really getting a good look of a Hellspawn who is not in the exact same garb as the others. His suit is quite unique and very reminiscent of who he was in his past life, as it takes on more of a plate armor type of feel. And this kind of is our first introduction to the idea that the symbiote can begin to change its appearance based on the personality of the host and who that host was in their former life. Here on the next page, we see Angela and the medieval spawn moving through the forest as they finally come up to the cave that she spoke of, that the ogre lived in and has her sister in. We also see more of the inscriptions on the parchment, explaining how one would go about hunting a Hellspawn. It's brought up that it's important to kill the Hellspawn on Earth as quickly as possible and not allow them to age, if that's possible, as they're not as well equipped to put up as strong of a fight when they're first there, as they don't fully grasp how their powers work and are often still confused about their past life, as it was stated that they're generally kept in hell anywhere in a state of, I guess, stasis, the way it's read, that they're generally kept in hell anywhere from 5 to 10 years from the point that they die to the point that they're brought back as a Hellspawn. Just enough time to kind of let the world move on past their existence and not allowing them to just step back into the role that they once had, which is what they thought they were getting when they made the deal with the Mabulja. We see that they go into the cave, and it's very dark, so the medieval spawn uses some of his powers to create a light. She exclaims that he's a wizard, but he says he's no wizard, and then asks her how much further in the cave they need to go before they find this ogre and her sister, and we see a bit of a ghoulish grin back here on Angela as the trap is about to be sprung. We see here on the next page that Angela drops the disguise and allows medieval spawn to see who she really is, as she's completely geared up and ready for the fight. He's, of course, confused, not understanding what's going on. We see here at the top that his current power level is at 5,478. He tries to mount a defense as he realizes that he's under attack, but Angela is too fast. She knocks him backwards, jumps on top of him, grabs him, throws him by his cape into the wall, smashing him up against it, and then jabs the lance directly into his chest. It is brought up that while the angels have a multitude of weapons at their disposal for hunting the hellspawn, the lance is by far the most important tool that they use, and it is actually written in this book that it's considered almost suicidal to try and hunt a hellspawn without a lance. And that is because the lance itself is able to pierce the symbiote, or as it's referred to in this book, the carapace, and, really do a lot of harm to the spawn, as the carapace provides a certain level of protection to the host that most weapons cannot penetrate, as we will see going forward. Here we see on the next page that the medieval spawn is basically down and out. Angela's got him pinned underneath her. He doesn't understand what's happening. She continues to mock him for not being any smarter than he is, when realistically it's just that he has no clue as to what's actually going on. And this is where it's explained of how the lance actually works. Not only can it pierce the costume, which, by the way, many things can actually pierce the costume, the big difference that the lance has is that it can actually separate a hellspawn from the symbiote, which really, the way it's explained in this, no other weapon can do. But the way it's also explained in this one is that it can only be done at incredibly close range. So after Angela pins Spawn down and has severely wounded him with the large blade end of the lance, she turns it around and we see that there is somewhat of a, I guess, almost gun barrel type of thing on the reverse end as it's charging up and releases a huge blast of energy which disintegrates the hellspawn from within the symbiote, or the K3 Mirlu, as it was called in issue number 8. Now, without its host, the symbiote is basically defenseless and needs to try and get away, but it can't. It's too late. It's stuck in the world of the living. It has no host to feed on. It's too weak to defend itself, and Angela makes very quick work of it by using the lance to destroy what was left, and then takes her prize, which is one of the hellspawn symbols that was on him. That's always left behind when a hellspawn is killed. She, of course, has a rather large collection, as she is one of the most proficient of all of the angels at hunting and disposing of the hellspawn. And then we are teleported 800 years later into New York City. I'd like to point out at this point, too, that 800 years later means that her fight with the medieval spawn took place in the year 1193, which was 1 year after the Third Crusade ended, and alludes to the fact that it's very possible that medieval spawn fought in the Crusades, although in this issue that is not specifically stated, and maybe it is in the future. It's been a long time since I've read some of the backstory issues about medieval spawn or the medieval spawn miniseries, so I could be wrong about that. But the timeline does match up pretty well, as the fight with medieval spawn was happening roughly right in the middle of the Middle Ages. Elsewhere in New York, we're transported back to the alleys that Spawn lives with all of the homeless men, as we see he is having a dream that may or may not be some foreshadowing for next month's issue. Spoiler alert, this is foreshadowing for next month's issue. And we see Spawn being woken up. The homeless guy says that the cops have been around asking about his whereabouts and if any of the homeless guys who live in the alleyways have seen him. They, of course, are happy to have Spawn amongst them, as he's done his best to try and protect them and help them out when he can. So they have no problem making sure that the cops can't find him. Al, we see, is very grateful for this. He asks if there's anything that he can do to help, but the guy that he's speaking to said that they were happy to do it, as the cops have really just treated them like dirt, even killing one of their members in issue number 5. If you'd like to get a refresher on that, please feel free to check out my video on Spawn number 5. And that, they're just trying to help out their friend. However, we see that one of the men in the alleyway is not so quick to dismiss Al's offer to do something for them or help them out in some way, as he asks if Al can create a crate of strawberry ripple wine for the group of men in the encampment. Al says that he's not sure if he can do this, but the man whispers to him that it is within his power and abilities. He just needs to concentrate on it, as we see him kind of instructing Al on how to not use his own powers, but to siphon some of the power from the suit itself to transmute something like that, as we see Al's current power level is at 8,031, which, by the way, brings up the point that at this point, Spawn has burned through almost 20% of his power in roughly a month's time. He is just scorching through it at this point in the comics. And to his own surprise, he happens to transmute a case of strawberry ripple wine, to the joy of the man that was just speaking to him, and of course the rest of the encampment, as they are all popping bottles and having some fun. Al seems a little bit, surprised at how nice this guy is to him, but tells him thank you, as he asks the man his name, and he introduced himself as Nicholas Cagliostro, more specifically Count Nicholas Cagliostro, and then says, that he's pleased to make the acquaintance of one Al Simmons, which shocks Spawn very much so, because this man knows his name and they've never met before. But it's strange and interesting that he wasn't at all surprised or a little bit shocked by the fact that this man knew how he could use his powers to transmute a case of wine, and even explain to him a way to do it that wouldn't drain his own power level. It's kind of funny that Al was so kind of, cavalier about that, but is now shocked that this man knows what his name was. Elsewhere in the city, we are transported back to the location of Angela, as she enters a large building which looks to probably be somewhere in Manhattan, walks up to the front desk and says that she would like to speak to Gabriel. The man at the desk asks if she has an appointment. She says that she doesn't need one and tells him to just page Gabriel and let her know that Angela is here. Gabriel tells her to come right up, and the two of them do have a history, as Angela says that she's looking wonderful, but Gabriel says the last time that they saw her, she looked exactly the same, and that she stated that she was all pasty-faced and would never go anywhere. However, Gabriel is now in charge of all Terran affairs, basically meaning that when it comes to the forces of heaven, she's overseeing all of Earth. She asks Angela what she's here for, and Angela states that she's going to, go against Gabriel's wishes in causing some trouble, as she has a hunting permit. Despite looking a little bit shocked, we can see that Gabriel, doesn't really want to let Angela go out hunting, but it's implied that this permit is given out by someone who outranks her. And she states that she was aware of the Hellspawn's presence on Earth, but was not really too worried about it, and it was not one of her top priorities, which is a little surprising. You'd think that, given what we saw and read in the beginning part of this book, that it would have been something that was a little more of a concern to the affairs of the armies of heaven and taking out a hellspawn, especially one that's only roughly a month old. But she tells Angela that she doesn't want her stalking him and tailing him and dragging this out. She wants her to take care of this hellspawn quickly and get out of Earthrealm, because most likely Gabriel just doesn't want to deal with whatever havoc might be wreaked by Angela's presence. We're then teleported back to the alleyways as Cagliostro essentially mocks Spawn for all of the exact same things I was mocking him for a few moments ago, in that, he brought up the Mabulja, he brought up the fact that Spawn had these powers, how to use them, and suddenly it's just because he happens to say his name that's what clues Spawn off, kind of insulting his intelligence. And, it is kind of funny that Spawn doesn't, pick up on these things, but Spawn also questions who the Mabulja is, which kind of starts to show that he is probably still dealing with some of his memory loss issues that have been plaguing him throughout his existence as a Hellspawn, and that it's not just memory loss in terms of things that happened a long time ago, but also things that happened in the more recent past. And then we see that there is a fold-out poster by one Jim Lee of the brand new character Angela, so let's take a look at that. And of course, this fold-out poster looks amazing. Why wouldn't it? You've got pencils by Jim Lee, you've got inks by Todd McFarlane. It would have been cool if this could have been colored, but even as a black and white, it looks fantastic. Super cool detail. Just two really great artists collaborating on a really awesome fold-out poster. I love seeing this kind of stuff. On the next page, we see that the next issue will contain a fold-out poster of Rob Liefeld's Bloodwolf. If you'd like to know more about Bloodwolf, feel free to check out my videos both on Darker Image #1 and Bloodwolf #1. Back in the alleyways, Spawn is questioning how Cog knew that he made a deal with the devil, and Cog asks him which devil he's speaking of. Spawn implies that there's only one, but Cog quickly disputes that. And he's correct in the Spawn overall mythos. There is more than one quote-unquote devil character, as each circle of hell that we learned about in issue #8 has its own hierarchy and leadership. And he's explaining to Spawn that every single person in this alleyway made a deal with the devil at some point to get something that they wanted, but then ended up paying for it, which is why they're all homeless now and have to live in this squalor. He, trying to kind of explain to Spawn, but not clearly. Cog does a really good job of keeping Al in the dark about a lot of things that he could more clearly explain to him. However, their conversation is interrupted by a stranger in the alley. Spawn wonders who this woman in the alley is. She introduces herself as Angela, and he asks if she could please leave, as he's got a lot on her mind, and then she exclaims that she knows that's why she was able to get so close, as she quickly transforms into her angelic appearance. And this seems to be a bit of an illustrative mistake or continuity error, as Angela only has one lance, but is depicted here as having multiple. It looks like we see one large shaft going here at the base of the lance, like we saw on the cover and previous pages. But we also see coming up right here is another large lance head, and she's also holding a large lance head here. It wouldn't throw me off that much were it not for the fact that in the next panel, we see that she only has one lance that she's holding and everything else has disappeared. Now, maybe this is something that she can do, but I don't believe that's ever stated as being part of her power set or list of abilities. The weapons that she has on her are the weapons she carries. She is also holding a dagger in one hand that disappears later on. But I feel like Todd just wanted to get like a super cool action image here, and then, never thought about making sure that the rest of the images of Angela within this book matched up to it. As we see, she wastes no time in launching Spawn backwards through the air, trying to take shots at him. He dodges out of the way. He says that he doesn't want to hurt her. She says that she does not want to hurt him. She actually wants to destroy him as she lunges forward at her target. We see here that the lance thrusts forward, beginning to pierce Al's chest, and then suddenly he disappears out of, quote unquote, the carapace or the symbiote. Or at least that's what Angela is led to believe, as we see a small bit of, I guess, hellfire or necroplasmic fire coming from the cloak. And what Spawn actually did here, or what Al Simmons actually did here, and it's not really stated whether or not this was by his own doing or if this was an involuntary reaction that the carapace itself took for him, is he essentially transported his body from out of the basic costume into the cloak itself. And we see his hands then reaching up out of the cloak on the ground, catching Angela by surprise, grabbing her, pulling her down into the cloak, as we see she drops the lance in the process, and they are now inside of the cloak, which I don't know if this is a pocket dimension, but we see that everything has a green hue, so it is implied that they are surrounded by some sort of necro energy or necroplasm, as Spawn has Angela in her clutches, and without the lance, she is quite vulnerable to having to face off against a hellspawn, as was stated earlier in the book. Trying to dispose of a spawn without a lance is considered widely to be a suicidal endeavor. Here on the next page, we see that Angela is in rather dire straits as she begins to plead with Al that she apparently cannot breathe and asks him to let her go. It's not explicitly shown whether or not he releases her or she is just able to escape, as she then manages to emerge from his cloak, as we see the spark of energy here, and then a huge blast of energy trailing her body as it assumedly ascends back to heaven, and the rest of the homeless men just being kind of in awe as to what they've seen. Kind of funny that they're not more surprised by this, but I guess at this point they've been around Spawn enough to just expect the unexpected. I'd also like to point out how cool this shot is right here. I really like the use of vanishing points and perspective that Todd had right here. I really appreciate that kind of stuff. It's always a type of illustration that I find to be really important in establishing scale, and he did a great job here. It's just kind of some nerdy art talk. We then see this cool image of Spawn pulling himself up out of his cloak as it appears to almost be like a liquid. He's not certain as to what exactly was happening. Cog exclaims that he's never seen an angel, take off like a bat out of hell, kind of a joke on his part as he laughs to himself. And Al, still confused, says that was an angel. He's like, why was she trying to kill me if she was an angel? Then of course, Cog, not giving him full explanations or straight answers, just says, of course she was trying to kill you. You've still got so much to learn, kind of mocking him for being dumb. And then Al notices that she, in her haste to escape, has left the lance behind. He asks what it is and goes to pick it up. Cog tells him that he shouldn't do that and not to touch it and leave it alone. Al notices that there's a button on the side, which he presses as Cog exclaims, "No, don't," and we see a huge flash of light and energy overtake Spawn. We see then on the next page that Spawn is gone and there is just a stain of necroplasm with green smoke billowing up from it. Cog exclaims that he was a good kid, just not very bright. He tells the rest of the men in the alleyway that he's out of there as he grabs the case of wine. and walks away exclaiming that it's a pity he really believed that Simmons showed potential and could have been the one, which is where the story ends, and we're shown that the next issue is going to be written by none other than Dave Sim himself, creator of Cerberus. The next page is your basic Image info page, just letting us know what books are going to be coming out in the future. Nothing special to see there. We then see in the spawning ground on the next 2 pages that most of the letters this time around are actually rather critical of Todd. People are starting to get a little upset about the constant jabs that he and other Image creators are taking, most notably at Marvel Comics, as many of the people reading Spawn are also still fans of Marvel books and enjoy reading said books and are not really too pleased about, what they perceive as the Image creators, insulting and, slighting artists that they enjoy looking at. And Todd explains that he's not taking pokes at the artist or the writers or any of the creative talent, but more the people on the executive end for the way that they've been doing business and the way that they're essentially kind of, almost screwing creators out of recognition and money, which is funny considering after this issue, Todd tried to do essentially that exact same thing to Neil Gaiman, kind of the pot calling the kettle black type of thing right there, but again, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And unfortunately, when a lot of money starts to get involved, people start to make really bad decisions and hurt people that they claim to be their friends because they're chasing after that almighty dollar. But the things that Todd talks about in these letters is not terribly incorrect. And in 1993, this was prior to the death of Jack Kirby, which was, I think, probably the real eye-opening moment for a lot of people, and kind of the point where it really showed how poorly the industry was treating creators. Sure, Stan Lee created a large percentage of the Marvel characters that we know of and care about today, but when you're talking about characters that were created by Stan, Spider-Man, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, when you think about the way those characters look that I just named, you think about the way that they look, and the picture that you're getting in your head is responsible, or is there because of Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby was the one who, created the trademark and seminal looks that we have in our heads of these characters. And after he died, he didn't have a lot to his estate. Marvel had not just been like giving tons of money to him. His widow struggled for a long time financially after his death. And the fact that Marvel didn't do a better job of trying to help out the wife of someone so important to the success of their company and building them up into being at that time probably worth hundreds of millions, if not at least maybe $1 billion, was almost criminal. Like it was inexcusable that they would not have done better to try and take care of his family after he was gone. Here on the next page, we get an advertisement for Youngblood Strike File. I have a few issues of Youngblood Strike File. I'll have to see what they are. I may make some videos on this series in the future. There's not a ton of issues to it, if I remember correctly. And then on the next page, we see an advertisement for Freak Force. I have every issue of Freak Force because Freak Force is awesome. I love this comic. It is one of my favorite team-up comics in Image, probably second to Stormwatch, but still way up there. I love the characters. It was such a cool, ragtag group of crime fighters that existed in Chicago and were a spin-off of the Savage Dragon universe. I really, really like this book, and we'll definitely be getting into that in future episodes. Not sure when, but it will happen. On the final page of the book, we see an advertisement for Deathblow / Cybernary #1. If you'd like to know more about Deathblow / Cybernary #1, you can check out both my videos on Darker Image #1, which is the first appearance of Deathblow, and then Deathblow #1, which is a double issue that is Deathblow #1 and Cybernary #1. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement telling us that Frank Miller will be writing Spawn #11. And that was Spawn #9. Probably the most important issue of Spawn from the first year of this comic. Not just for the story elements it introduces, the new characters it introduces, but again, the legal woes that this book ended up causing for Todd McFarlane down the line. And again, those legal woes were really by his own doing. You know, Todd tried to get away with something that he really shouldn't have, and tried to kind of keep all of the money from these characters for himself when he should have been sharing it with Neil Gaiman. And it came back to bite him in the ass, so to say. And, you know, like I said, I believe that Gaiman was 100% in the right in that he should have been getting some sort of royalties for these characters, and Todd should have been acknowledging him more than he was as the co-creator of these characters and been paying him his dues. But overall, pretty great book. Really like the introduction of Medieval Spawn, the introduction of Angela, the introduction of finally seeing, you know, the heaven side of the quote-unquote war between heaven and hell, starting to get a little bit more story to it. This really, it was a great issue in terms of how much more story and lore we got out of one book. It's a lot to cram into one book, which is why today's video is actually kind of long. But once again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may differ. Maybe you believe that Todd was in the right. Maybe you believe that this issue wasn't very good at all. But either way, those are your opinions and you're entitled to them. There's nothing wrong with it. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.